Welcome to Talent Talks, the podcast where your host, Dan Maisey, dives into hiring's ins and outs. Our goal is to reveal how to attract top talent. Through interviews with leaders in sports, media and entertainment, we explore job search and recruitment trends, offer interview tips and strategies to differentiate yourself, and uncover their hiring insights. Whether you're prepping for an interview or interested in hiring trends, Talent Talks is your essential resource. Let's dive in. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Mark-Aurele Jules to the podcast. As a seasoned leader with over a decade of experience in tech-focused operations, Mark brings a wealth of knowledge in team management and strategic operations. His journey through the realms of insurtech, logistics, tourism, and healthcare startups, combined with his roles across different continents, offers unique insights into the global recruitment and talent strategies. Fluent in multiple languages, Mark embodies the analytical and strategic mindset required to navigate the complex landscape of today's job market. Join us as we explore his innovative approaches to hiring, mentoring, and building teams that stand out. Mark, welcome to Talent Talks. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thank you very much for hosting me.
Good. Great to have you on. We ask this to every single one of our guests, as you well know. What are your experiences of hiring and being hired? And do you have lessons learned?
Yeah, I mean, very different experiences. I think it changed a lot over the last decades, both in terms of hiring and being hired. I guess the things that changed the most from my perspective, especially working in tech companies, is the involvement of tech in the process. And even more recently with the arrival of artificial intelligence, how this can impact the way we do the way we run the recruitment process.
Have you used that yet? Have you delved into the use of AI and the different tools and techniques that are currently flooding the market? Is probably the best way of putting it. Have you used any of these tools, or are you still yet to will do in the future?
Not directly, but definitely we can't deny at the moment the fact that whether you want to use it or not, it's already involved in the process. One thing that has completely changed, for example, is the way we look at case studies, for example. For example, that when you're sending a case study to someone or when you're doing one yourself, you can leverage this use of AI. So I would say that a lot of the answers that you receive become much more similar and standardized because it's basically just copying the case and getting the answers. So the way to differentiate yourself, what are the other answers that you can get, in which way you're going to present them, becomes even more important than it was before.
And how, just with the use of sort of AI in recruitment, we've spoken to a lot of a slightly older generation of industry leaders within in the sports space and just general workplace. And it might be just a generational thing, have a bit of a, not fear, that's the wrong word, but sort of a half negative view on the AI could actually not enable potential candidates to sort of shine through. What are your thoughts on that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's like any kind of change, we need to embrace it. Like the question is not whether I like it or not. I think it's like everything, you would find pros and cons, but I think you cannot focus on the same things anymore. It's simple things, but the way someone is writing emails, for example, and this kind of things is still relevant in the way you're going to communicate with people. But at the same time, if you are not extremely good at conveying your message at the moment, you can just type it with your AI tool and ask your AI tool to rephrase it. So is that the skill that you're going to prioritize in the process? Not anymore, I think, and it will become the case less and less. And we will tend to prioritize other things. I truly think that the highest priority always should be the cultural fit that you have with the candidates before hiring them. And even more so if now a part of it can be automated thanks to AI or it can be made easier, it gives us the opportunity to focus on different things. But yeah, for sure, it changes a bit the profiles of the people that we're hiring. Now, I fully understand the generational gap and difference and how we welcome it. I might be the same in 20 years with other innovations, but at the moment, I'm just trying to, I don't think I was resistant to it, but it took me a while to adopt it. Now, there are parts of it that I understood that I'm trying to use myself, and parts of it where I'm just trying to, as I said, embrace change. And whether we want it or not, it's going to be part of the next year, the next decade, and so on. So they just try to make the best out of it.
So, I think the nail on the head in terms of the macro side of things in changing the way that we work as a whole, not necessarily replacing, but just augmenting what we're doing. And actually, the people that can take that on board and that can utilize different tools in the right way are actually going to become much more effective. You touched there on the fact that the cultural side of things is the most important side to you. What do you look for from a cultural perspective? And also, how do you identify if you are just looking at CV on a paper, for example, if we go slightly more old school?
So what am I looking for and how do I identify it? I think there are values. It's really connected to the values that you have. So there are values that I will have as a person. Usually I will try to work in an organization where we have the same values, but the things that I'm looking for in a candidate are these company values and not necessarily mine, because this is what we should all have together as a team. Personally, one that I truly believe in, for example, is transparency. I know it's a very fashionable word that a lot of companies are putting on their website and every single document that you will find. But I've seen what it is to be in a company that is really transparent and in a company that pretends to be transparent. How do you measure it? I don't think it's feasible on a CV. However, I think there are things that you see during the recruitment process. I really enjoy both when I'm hiring or when I'm in the process, for example, when there is a cultural interview, and that this one is very separate from the rest of the process. Like, it's not the same person who should evaluate your skills, because this person will have a bias towards what you discussed already in the past. But I like when someone else is involved. When I do the cultural interview, for example, I don't want to hear about everything that happened during the skills interview, for example. I don't want to see the CV. I'm here just to meet the person, get to know them. And you try to, I guess, ask a lot of questions about specific examples, experiences that these people had, more than theoretical things or projects and so on, so that they can really express the way it happened in their lives, in their careers. And you can also show, for example, sometimes we tend to think very often of the examples of things that were successful, but there are also disappointments, for example, that can come from things that went badly in a job, and the way you're going to phrase it, and the way you're going to share it, you can feel the values of the candidate.
And if we just take it back a step, your career has been a very illustrious career. You worked for some fantastic companies, sport and outside of sport. What do you think has made you stand out as an individual? Because obviously there's different companies you've worked with who probably have had different values. What, compared to obviously, the number of competitors that you've been up against, just from a candidate's perspective, that sort of put your head above the parapet, that's made you get the job?
So first of all, whether it's about me or not, and what I look for in a candidate, and what I try to share when I'm in an interview, is I truly believe, and that's something that has been gravitating around me for a while, is this idea of unfair advantage. Like, there are things that we might all have the same skills when it comes to, I don't know, forming operations, for example, creating processes and so on. But when you look at the cultural fit, for example, and so on, I know that one of my unfair advantages, for example, is my multicultural. That's always been a strength for me. That's also the reason why at the beginning of my career, I decided not to stay in France, where I'm from Paris, but so I'm half French, half from Benin in West Africa. But I decided, first of all, to move to Germany. I lived in Berlin for 6 years. Now I've been in London for a few years as well. And this multicultural, this knowledge of different countries, different cultures, is definitely something that I can bring to a company. Now, of course, if I interview with a company that is fully focused on the UK market, this won't be my unfair advantage, because I don't have such an English culture compared to British candidates. But when it's a company that is looking at the European market or on a global level, yes, I definitely have something to bring. So I think I was lucky to understand this very early in my career, and to basically make the choices that would even strengthen this multicultural that I had. I think part of my purpose is really to empower multiculturalism through innovation. That's why I work in tech, and through sports.
This is potentially a controversial question here, Mark, but do you think there is enough diversity in the sports industry at the moment, from what you've experienced so far, bearing in mind your journey and the wider candidate pool and I suppose diversity pool in tech as well?
So with sports, first of all, no, there is definitely not, but there is progress, and that's what I think we fight for. at the moment, I'm COO of Fair Game, and that's one of the things that we fight for, to bring more diversity. If I think of football, for example, with the men's game, first of all, like we tend to always see the 11 or 25 players on the pitch and on the bench, but in the end, it's all about the organization. And depending on the club, that can be between, I don't know, 100 and 1,000 people. That's where you can bring a lot of diversity. I'm not saying that we should put a woman on the pitch, but like in all the other positions, whether it's related to the ones that are connected to the players, but just to the organization, like, there are a lot of jobs in branding, marketing, and like just making the club run. And there is room for people from completely diverse background. And that's one thing that we need to fight for. One initiative that I admire a lot is everything that Lewis Hamilton has been doing, for example, for motorsports. And it goes through explaining people that they can do this. It goes through giving them access to opportunities, but through education as well. So no, there is definitely not, but purely I think that there are more things being done at the moment than it was the case 10 years ago or 15 years ago. Yeah.
Awesome. From a hiring perspective, what are the sort of key things you're looking for in a candidate? Obviously, values underpin everything, but one thing we've talked about particularly is experience within a sector. So we just talk about sport. Sport is very closed book, if you will, and there's a lot of talent outside of sport that could come into sport and move it forward in a very positive way. How important to you is relevant sector experience when you're looking at hiring the next operations person underneath you?
So for me, the operations, it's not valuable at all. Like, I wouldn't say not at all, can be relevant, but that's not what I'm looking for. I think that was the case even for myself. My profile, like you listed in which industries I've worked. I think that's one of my strengths, is that when I look at a problem, I can look at it from different angles because I've worked in different industries. So I tend to think that actually having worked in another industry brings more diversity to the team, and will bring something that someone who has worked in the industry cannot necessarily bring. Everything that is related to industry knowledge, for example, is something that the organization should be able to teach you. I tend to think that one of the things that make employees happy is also this growth aspect and the fact that you're continuously learning. So they will learn a lot about sports. Should we look for people who already have this experience? I don't necessarily think so. It might be very relevant in other departments that have a strong connection with sport, and therefore you want them to have this knowledge already. It's part of the skill set, but in operations, I would rather work on someone who went through completely different experiences. It can be in terms of countries they worked in, industry they worked in, size of companies, or it can be very different things. But I think this is what really brings something to the team much more than the industry experience.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that goes not just across operational, obviously goes across a number of different functions. And I think it goes back to the point we said, the sports industry, I think, is slightly guilty of not embracing that as much as it can do. In terms of when you've been in the hiring processes, you've obviously got a very strong value proposition around what you're looking for when you're hiring. When it's been slightly flipped and you've been in the candidate hot seat, as it were, where have you seen some of the best and potentially worst kind of hiring practices within your kind of, obviously not naming any names, what you can if you want, but in terms of where you've then learned and taken that onto your own hiring strategies?
I think what really feels good from a candidate perspective is when the hiring process remains very human-centric, when you feel like you're not only a number, but they really consider you. Now, of course, I understand that we cannot do this for everyone. And when you send your CV and you receive an automated email, you're not expecting to have a personal connection. However, as I mentioned, for example, at the beginning, one of the values that I really have as a person, that I want to have in the company that I work for, is transparency. So, for example, transparency on the process, transparency on the timeline, transparency even on the rejection, for example. There are jobs that I didn't have where the feedback was extremely constructive, but because they took time to have a call and share the feedback with me, and this is how you discover the things that you can work on so that you will get it next time. So yeah, overall, it's being empathetic. I think this is something that very often lacks in the hiring process of a lot of companies. It's like, we know we're going to find one person, so we don't necessarily need to treat the other people or as the human beings they are. Yeah, So I think this is what defined the most the good and bad experiences that I had. Like it's, sometimes you spend a lot of time on. I gave you the example of at the beginning, for example, of case studies, but sometimes you spend a lot of time preparing for interviews, preparing for case studies, gathering information about the company, and then you're just treated like a number. This is not what anything wants. So yeah, making it human-centric, I think, is the best part of the experience. Personally, I've really enjoyed being in this position of looking for a new job, because it's also the opportunity to meet with a lot of people, to discover a lot of projects and so on. Of course, you don't want it to last forever, but it's you can learn a lot about the industry, about yourself, and so on. So it can be enjoyable if the people in front of you make it enjoyable.
And one thing, just sort of kind of mirroring exactly what you've said, one thing particularly, I mean, my experience has only been in the UK market, but the recruitment sector is so transactional. Like you
Okay.
say, you are just you're a number. You've obviously been in France, you've obviously been in Germany, and I'm sure potentially other countries as well as obviously the UK. Is it the same out in those markets? Is it just the sector of recruitment, which is just you're a number, you need us more than we need you sort of vibe?
I think it was quite similar. Yeah, I think so. What I mean, I see a lot of similarities because I've worked in tech companies, and I think in the end you have this ecosystem just of tech that you look at from on a European level. So I would say it's quite similar, maybe a tiny bit less, for example, in Germany than in the UK, but in the end it's not a big difference. I think the differences that you see in the end, you see them much more on the company level, which I think reflects a lot on the culture of the company. Because in the end, you also have a lot of companies with, I mean, I've worked in companies that had offices in many different countries. Like we had an office in Germany, in France, in the UK. I was, for example, based in Germany or leading the French market. Well, when the company culture makes it more human-centric or more transparent, you're going to feel it in all the countries. So in general, I would say that this is much more something I felt on a company level than on a country level.
That's interesting. I suppose, again, coming back into your role at Players and within the sports side of, what are you doing in terms of bringing, again, those lessons learned from across countries, but actually more specifically from a tech perspective? How are you trying to impact what you're doing with this role in terms of within the sports industry, and from a hiring perspective, how are you then trying to impact from your
Yeah.
experience what you're taking on to that?
So for me, starting to dive into the sports side of things was very interesting because that's my passion as a person. But all my experience was in tech, and I just saw the opportunity of applying my skills, my experience to something that I love, and I realized very quickly that this experience was extremely relevant. Now, I think what made it very relevant is that in tech, we have this extremely fast pace when it comes to everything, especially related to hiring. But in general, whenever it comes to implementing processes and setting objectives and reaching them and so on, we're much faster. So when you start to implement it in another industry, namely in sports, there are a lot of things that you can do in terms of saving time, saving costs, and so on. So for us, it's really the opportunity to structure things better, have better processes, be much more efficient, and therefore have more time to spend on the real interview. For example, one thing that I clearly implemented in my organization was to automate a lot of the email exchanges that we have, or the way we filter CVs, the way we receive them, the way we do the internal review filtering of all this, so that we can really focus on the qualitative parts of the experience much more than on the quantitative part.
Is that through the use of tech? Is that through the kind of like staff that you've got there? And following from that, how do you make sure that when you're filtering and going through those CVs and applications, that it's fair and it's unbiased, and actually there is much more of an opportunity for
Yeah.
others to be part of that process?
I mean, you can never be sure, right? But you can only try to do your best. I think, especially in operations, and usually operations cover the people operations part of the business. We really have this idea of our goal is to work on efficiencies, right? And when you work on efficiency, you really have this idea of not changing just to change, but constantly challenging the status quo and aim at continuous improvement. Like I feel like in a lot of industries and a lot of other departments, there is this idea of as long as something is working, we just maintain it. Well, actually for us, it's just about always finding the little edge that can allow you to be 1% better 1% better here. And if you do it every day, at the end of the year, you're 37 times better. So we do a lot of testing in everything we do. It's how do we ensure that we have more diversity? For example, it can be just about rephrasing something in the job description that you post. And one thing that we're good at is just measuring the amount of CVs that we receive from different, like as I said, from the 2 different job descriptions, and measuring which one is the best for what we're looking for. So, it's like, this is especially a big difference between men and women. We noticed that, it's quite famous, right? But depending on the vocabulary that you use, you might attract more men or more women. So being aware of the fact that in your organization, for example, you don't have enough women, rather than saying it's because there are none in the industry or none that are interested, what can you try to change to make them interested? So yeah, that's what we try to do, but it's not one big change that we implemented. I think it's really about the mindset of continuous improvement.
Mark, you've been absolutely seriously interesting, and it's been great to hear from somebody who hasn't come from traditionally a sports background, but actually is sort of a more fast-paced, innovative career that you've had. We always ask these 3 questions to every guest that we've had. There have been some very funny and interesting answers off the back of it. You do not have to mention any names if you don't want to. However, the first question I want to get from you is, what is the most frustrating thing about recruitment?
For me, it's always been on timing. There is always a problem with the timing. Since, like, most often it's been like we're looking for someone yesterday already.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can anticipate the fact that you're looking for someone, but you need budget approval for example. So instead of just being able to focus on finding the right candidates, you really have this time pressure of that makes it irrelevant to look for the perfect candidate. So timing for me has always been the most frustrating part of hiring.
Okay. And number 2, best hire and why?
There are a few. In the end, I think it was always a lot about, it's the people that were very complimentary to me. And I think that the reason why is that afterwards, once we work together, this is where you have the steepest learning curve. You really learn from each other. You can and then these learnings turn into emulation and so on. You're really pushing each other. So to name a few, there is, and if they listen, they will recognize themselves, that there is Sami that I hired in sales. I'm not a salesperson. I'm focused on the process part. And I learned really a lot from him when it comes to selling. There is Sarah in HR and Caroline for operations as well. Yeah.
Awesome. And then last but not least, and we have sort of kind of touched on technology, AI, etc. You mentioned in the beginning, but one thing you would change about the world of recruitment?
So I told it to you as being my most important value is transparency for the candidates on the process. Like, I've had processes where it was clearly told to me since the very first email, like, we aim at doing interview number 1 with this person on this date and this person with this date. And they tell you like what's the ratio of people who will go from one round to another, so that it changes completely the expectations management. And therefore the experience of the candidates, so full transparency. There is also always the question of what's the salary package that you expect. Like, who cares? You already have a number when you're hiring someone, so just share the range, and in the end it should be something very transparent. So for me, completely transparency. I will change it completely, and I hope to be able to do my part of it on my level. Yeah.
No, I agree with all of that.
100%. Let's go and find a transparent recruitment firm then. But Mark, you've been absolutely fantastic. Thank you for your time. And yeah, Dan, I've certainly learned a lot from you. It's super interesting. And yeah, thank you very much for your time.
It's been brilliant, Mark.
You.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Great experience.
Bye. Cheers. Bye.